Most people in a toxic relationship with money are completely convinced they are not. That is the first symptom. And it is the one that makes every other symptom impossible to treat. Here's what a toxic relationship with money looks like to most people. Debt that spirals, accounts that empty before the month ends, visible chaos that announces itself loudly enough that everyone around you can see it. So when someone earns a good income, has a savings account, and pays their bills on time, they conclude they are fine. The investigation ends before it starts. But the version this video is about does not look like chaos from the outside. It looks like discipline. It presents itself as responsibility. It earns a good salary, keeps the books in order, and loses sleep every single night. A woman who manages a team of 12, has saved consistently for 7 years, and carries no consumer debt, wakes up at 2 a.m. running numbers she already knows the answers to. The numbers have not changed since she checked them 3 hours ago. They will not change by the time she checks them again at 4 a.m. But she checks them anyway, because the anxiety that wakes her does not respond to facts. It is not caused by the numbers. It is caused by something older and harder to locate, something that a higher salary has never once been able to reach. She is not an edge case. The research consistently shows she is the majority. There are 4 myths at the center of a toxic relationship with money, not 4 behaviors. 4 beliefs held with complete confidence, treated as financial common sense, and quietly causing damage in people who by every external measurement appear to have it fully together. The first explains why earning more has never once made the anxiety smaller. The second is the most repeated lie in personal finance, and behavioral science has been systematically disproving it for 40 years. The third is the pattern most likely to be misread as a personality type, rather than a learned response to pain. And the fourth is the most dangerous one on this list, because it looks nothing like a problem. It looks exactly like the cure. The one you are most certain does not apply to you is probably the one running your finances right now. The first myth is called the more money myth. It sounds like this: if I could just earn a little more, the pressure would finally ease. The anxiety would settle. Everything would feel manageable at last. This belief is so widespread and so intuitively reasonable that most people have never once questioned it. Below a certain income threshold, financial stress is a math problem, and more money does genuinely solve it. But the research diverges sharply from that belief the moment basic needs are met. Behavioral finance studies conducted across income levels consistently find that financial anxiety does not correlate with how much someone earns. It correlates with the distance between what someone earns and what they believe they should have achieved by now. That distance is not a financial measurement. It is a psychological one. And it cannot be closed by increasing the numerator, because the denominator adjusts the moment the income rises. A product director earning $210,000 a year describes his financial life as stressful, not because he is behind. His savings are growing, his mortgage is manageable, and his accounts are healthy by any reasonable standard. But his internal benchmark was set a decade ago by a version of himself who believed that earning this much would mean something very specific. It was supposed to mean safety. It was supposed to mean arrival. It means neither of those things. And no raise has ever changed that, because the benchmark moves with the income every single time. This is not a budgeting problem. It is a story problem. The story says the number is never enough. A bigger number does not rewrite the story. It simply gives the story a larger stage. Ask yourself honestly, if your income doubled tomorrow, which feeling would arrive first? Relief, or the quiet awareness of a new threshold you have not yet reached? The second myth runs deeper than income. It runs into identity. The Discipline Delusion says that the reason someone struggles financially is because they lack the self-control that more successful people were simply born with or developed through character. It is the most repeated piece of financial self-criticism that exists. The person who overspends tells themselves they need more willpower. The person who cannot save tells themselves they are weak. Both diagnoses are wrong. And behavioral economics has been proving that systematically for 4 decades. The problem was never the person. The problem was always the architecture. Willpower is not a personality trait. It is a depletable cognitive resource. And the research on ego depletion, developed by Roy Baumeister and expanded across hundreds of subsequent studies, makes this clear. Every decision a person makes across a day draws from the same finite pool. Financial decisions made late in the day, after sustained effort, or following emotionally demanding interactions do not reflect a person's true values. They reflect the state of a resource that has been consumed. Before you move past that, consider what it actually means. The people you believe are more financially disciplined than you are, not drawing from a deeper well of personal virtue. They have fewer financial decisions to make in real time because they built systems that automated those decisions long before the pressure arrived. Automatic transfers, standing savings rules, pre-committed allocations that execute without requiring willpower at all. The discipline was not in the moment, it was in the design. A secondary school teacher runs her classroom with precision and has not missed a workout in 2 years. By Friday evening, she has spent everything she had, not money, judgment. The spending follows because there is no system waiting to catch her when her resources run out. She blamed her character for 6 years before she understood that character was never the variable. The third myth is the Silence Pact. It presents itself not as a belief, but as a personality type. The idea is that not discussing money is a form of dignity, discretion, or simply personal preference. In reality, financial silence is one of the strongest documented predictors of long-term financial dysfunction. It does not function as privacy. It functions as a sealed room where errors compound without witnesses and patterns repeat without correction. A man who has been with his partner for 8 years has never once disclosed his actual income. Not because of distrust, because money was never spoken aloud in the house he grew up in, and the silence became so normalized it stopped feeling like a choice. He cannot ask for help when he needs it. He cannot identify when his patterns are abnormal because the silence removed every external reference point. The silence does not protect the finances. It protects the dysfunction inside them. The last myth is the hardest to accept because it does not look like a problem. It looks like diligence. It looks like awareness. It looks like exactly what a financially responsible person is supposed to do. The fourth myth is the obsession trap. The belief is that tracking every number, checking every balance, running every scenario, and staying in a constant state of financial vigilance is the hallmark of someone who takes money seriously. For people living inside this pattern, it feels like control. Researchers in behavioral finance call it ruminative financial attention, and they distinguish it sharply from the productive financial engagement that actually improves outcomes. Productive financial attention is intentional and time-bounded. You review the numbers, make a decision, and disengage. Ruminative financial attention is cyclical. You review the same information, feel temporary relief, the anxiety regenerates, and you return again. Nothing changes between the reviews, no new decision is made, no meaningful action follows. The loop does not produce financial clarity. It produces approximately 90 seconds of neurological quiet before the next cycle demands to begin. A financial analyst checks his accounts 14 times a day. His portfolio is performing well. His emergency fund is fully stocked. There is no active problem requiring monitoring at this frequency. But each check delivers brief relief before the cortisol resets and the compulsion returns. He has spent years believing his hypervigilance is the reason his finances are in order. The research suggests his finances are in order despite the hypervigilance, not because of it, and that the vigilance itself is costing him something that never appears in any account balance. The cost is not financial. It is the quiet erosion of every experience that should not involve money, gradually colonized by a nervous system that never learned to put the threat response down. Healthy financial behavior has an off switch. A toxic relationship with money never does. Now here's the question that determines which side of this you are actually on. Is a toxic relationship with money a personal psychological pattern that can be identified and changed? Or is it a rational response to a system designed to generate anxiety and keep people feeling perpetually behind? Both arguments are serious. Both point to something real. And the most honest answer is probably the one that makes you most uncomfortable to say out loud. Every video on this channel follows a thread. The next one pulls it further. If this made you see something differently, subscribe. New videos every week. I will see you in the next one.